But I've had an opportunity to meet many great people, all of you certainly standing here over the last several months. And one person that I have really very much enjoyed getting to know, who does a phenomenal job of representing us here in Washington State, is Representative Kelly Chambers. And so she is up for re-election this year. And her and her husband Jeff have become dear friends of mine and Lindy's. And they brought their fuzzy little friends along with them too. But this is Kelly Chambers.
Okay, the most important person here today, this is Chewy Chambers. He doesn't know what his mama's up to. Twinkle.
Hi everyone, I'm Kelly Chambers. I'm happy and honored to represent the 25th Legislative District in Puyallup in Pierce County. So thank you all so much for being here today on this Memorial Day as we honor and pay tribute to those men and women that served our country and laid down their lives so that each one of us can sleep under the blanket of freedom every night in this country and feel safe in doing so. You know, I'm so glad that Joshua Freed is running for governor. We've had 30 years of essentially one-party rule in Washington, and it's time for a different kind of leadership here. For stepping out and having a vision for our state and in a way that we can do things better that allows us to exercise our right to freedom and to pursue life, liberty, and happiness in Washington. So I support Joshua Freed. I'm so glad that you're here today, and thank you for being here.
Chambers.
He has a Facebook page.
It does, probably. A lot of people follow. But it's so fun to look around the crowd here. Thank you so much for coming out today as we mourn certainly the loss of life, but also celebrate the same freedoms that we're able to enjoy because of those who we've lost. But hopefully you've had an opportunity to go by a couple of the memorials here and just have a time of remembrance and prayer. Thank you so much for all of you who have served in the military. Appreciate the freedom that we have today because of freedom, or because of the sacrifice that you've given to be able to make sure that we can even stand here on these steps. It's been an interesting last 8 weeks, hasn't it? Yeah, for sure. As we've been under a stay-at-home order, and it started, as voluntary. We were all willing to stay at home and make sure that we're keeping each other safe and our families safe, and we're working together as one, right? But I think that really took a very dark turn about 3 weeks ago when the Attorney General stood with the governor and said, we're going to start enforcing these stay-at-home orders. So if you see somebody going to their non-essential job and you're on your way to your essential job, pick up the phone, call the government, and we're going to take away their business license, we're going to fine them, and even put them into jail. That's not what Washington State is all about. Washington State is about the freedoms of which we've enjoyed since the beginning, right? And now we're in a place where we're having, under penalty of perjury here, penalty that we're going to actually face crimes we're actually trying to go to provide for our families. And the message is consistent and clear as we go across Washington State, as we're hearing from different businesses and individuals that their families are extremely hurting. A dear friend of mine is delivering food to about 200 families here up north in Pierce County every week, as people are facing very difficult times because the governor has declared that they cannot work. And we have the freedom to work, yet he's been making these arbitrary decisions, whether you're essential or non-essential, using very deceptive dials that I don't think are scientific, and they're certainly unproven. And yet he's using those as dictates on how we're supposed to be able to go about our day. And so during this period of time, as he's declaring essential and non-essential, he's letting pot shops be open and liquor stores be open, and you can go to Costco or Walmart. He's shutting the small stores. Yet across Washington State, as Evan and I and my team have been traveling around, we're going into small towns that are just starting to open. I think as Jay Inslee squeezes his fist tighter and tighter and tighter, he's losing the grip across Washington State. He's certainly lost touch with the citizens that he said he would represent. When he made the statement just about 4 weeks ago that this is really hard work, he wished it wasn't on his shoulders, he wish it was on somebody else's. Well, it's time for him to step aside because we need new leadership in Washington State. It's heartbreaking as you consider that we have the highest unemployment rate in the nation, 30%. We are number one of all the states in the nation. Now, of course, some people are wondering how much of that is contributed to by the fraudulent movements that have happened. I don't know if you heard about this, but hundreds of millions of dollars of payments have gone out to a Nigerian group committing fraud, taking away these unemployment checks from people that are suffering today in Washington State, families that are looking to make a decision whether they go to work. The signs are flying now. Go get it. Well, this is fun. The wind is blowing in Washington. It's time, the winds have changed.
Yeah.
But the message certainly is consistent and clear in Washington State. People want to reopen, and they want to do it in a way that's responsible. And we're seeing this already. I mean, folks that are looking at the decision whether they're going to shut down their business that they've been running their entire life, it's their livelihood. And the governor's saying, no, you need to stay at home. But we're in this together. Yet, if you look over here to your left, my right, you can see that we have a mansion we pay for him. He sits behind a high wall, and he continues to collect the salary. Yet many people are not receiving their unemployment checks in their highest unemployment in the land. People are literally looking across the table and looking at their kids who they're not able to provide food for. There's a lawsuit right now that's going to be heard tomorrow at 3 o'clock in Yakima. The plaintiff is now, he's taken on 2 to 3 jobs. He looks across the table at his kids, and they've been living on top ramen for the last several weeks. That's the reality of what's happening in Washington State. Now, I live on top ramen normally because I like top ramen. But the point is that we have people that are in absolute poverty in a typical environment or an economy, that you're seeing that people are living paycheck to paycheck. Yet today, in the highest unemployment in the land, Jay Inslee is literally killing Washington, and we're watching it happen before us. But you people who believe in freedom want to stand up for that freedom, and that's the message that we took across the state. That it's time for us as a people to rise up and take our state back before it's too late. We've been waiting for 35 years. There's been 35 years of a Democrat controlling the governor's mansion. And with it, you see a rampant increase in crime. You see a rampant increase in taxes and spending. Just last year in the legislative session here in the House and in the Senate, they're on the floor at midnight passing a state budget that increased spending by 17%. They increased taxes by $2.7 billion, while we're, of course, trusting state government. And they did it by using a tool called a title-only bill. It's a white piece of paper, and they amend the white piece of paper at midnight with $2.7 billion in new taxes. We need a governor who truly understands that we need to cut state government. After 35 years of one-party control of the governor's mansion, then he gets to make 1,500 appointments consistently. All the governors have. So the size of state government has exponentially grown. And so that burden is just on the back of all the taxpayers in Washington State. It's time that we cut state government by at least 25%, so we can retain more of our money. We know in a time of crisis, waiting for the government to provide for the needs that we have is not the way that we should be running our state. It's best to leave the money within our hands, the one who have made the money and work for that money, rather than look the state government continue to grow it. Under Jay Inslee, actually the budget has increased by 60%. All around us during just the last 7 years. It's unbelievable to see that. So we need fiscal responsibility. There's an insatiable appetite for taxing and spending that Jay Inslee has. So if we rein back in that control, if we let our voice be heard this November, then we can have a government that truly understands that we need to be focusing on the people, because it's government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's how I'll make sure that I am serving here in Washington State. Actually, as I serve as governor, I'm not going to take a salary, because it's important to me that the people of Washington State know that I'm here to serve in Washington or in Olympia, rather than truly try to live off what some people do. Some people get connected to special interests and they find opportunities through that, or they enrich themselves off the initiative process. I think that has gone on far too long. We need to turn that tide here in Washington. One thing that's extremely concerning to me, and I know that you've seen it as well, and as I travel around the state, I know how prevalent it is, but it's the rampant increase in homelessness. And it's driven by what I call unaddressed mental health issues and, of course, drug and alcohol addiction. We see that 30% of homeless are struggling from mental health issues, because in July 2018, Western State Hospital was decertified by the federal government. They actually came in, they looked about and saw it was dangerous for the caregivers as well as those receiving care. And now 30% of the homeless, the most vulnerable among us, are struggling from mental health issues that are not being addressed. As a mental health counselor myself, I counseled for many years, actually in King County. All the kids that started fires, I used to counsel them, which is kind of interesting. But I mean, these young pyromaniacs who would burn down houses, something was consistent. 90% of their parents, their fathers, were in jail. And so we need to start attacking what's going on there, making sure that we're keeping people safe, and reestablish a mental health program in Washington State that keeps people safe. But the number one contributor to homelessness in Washington State is drug and alcohol addiction. We see that as drug culture continues to increase in Washington state, so does crime. Lindy and I got involved in running Initiative 27 2 years ago in King County. We saw that with the increase in the drug culture, they wanted to have what's called a heroin injection site. So Seattle City Council, King County Council wanted to have these places where if you're addicted to heroin, you walk in, you get the tourniquet for your arm, you get the needles, the syringe, you get the pan to cook your heroin in, even the matches. So everything to put poison within your veins. That's not a compassionate way to take care of those who are addicted to drugs or alcohol. So Lindy and I started Initiative 27. We got 70,000 signatures, 1,000 volunteers. And I work with this Neighborhood Safety Alliance, Speak Out Seattle, and Save Seattle. These are groups that typically would only work with the Democrat, and they were willing to work with the Republican. Right now, when we have such division in our state, you need a leader that's willing to work across party aisles to make sure that we can find common ground to address the pandemic that we're seeing, certainly in the rise of the drug culture. It is time that we can turn this state around. I believe that we can. But through it all, we actually got it qualified for the ballot, and then I had to come all the way here to the state Supreme Court to fight for our rights to have the initiative on the ballot. Yet, all 9 of those justices said that heroin injection sites were positive. But not one of them ever went up to Canada to see what Lindy and I did 5 different times, to go on the streets of East Hastings and see that the death rate from heroin has increased from 190 people in 2003 to last year's 1,750, an 800% increase. So clearly the normalization of the use of heroin is not the right direction to go. But we need to enforce our laws here in Washington state. So when I become governor, I'll actually declare a state of emergency on day 1. I'll pull in the Department of Transportation and the state troopers. We're going to clean up all the right-of-ways. Because we're seeing homelessness here in Olympia, we're seeing it in Seattle. We're seeing it in Seattle, we're seeing it in Federal Way, we're seeing it in Yakima where they close the doors to the Chamber of Commerce during the middle of the day, and in Spokane, 3,000 homeless a night. And what's terrible is you see what happens with the rise of crime. 20% increase in assaults on individuals, a 40% increase on assaults on police officers. It costs $35,000 a year to support your heroin addiction. And so people are breaking into people's cars, they're assaulting people on the street, they're breaking into people's homes. And we need to restore safety and stability in Washington state. Because already under Jay Inslee in 7 years, we've seen murder increase by 41% and rape increase by 65%. The population's only increased by 7. It's unbelievable what's happening around us, and it's like we've been sitting here and haven't recognized how quickly things have changed. But I have dear friends, maybe some of you even here, who voted Democrat just 3 years ago, and now they look at their own party, they don't even recognize it anymore. So by making sure that we restore order in Washington state, we can make a change. So under the Freedom Administration, if you're using heroin in the streets, as I've seen so many times, you're going to go to jail, or you're going to go to Pathways to Recovery. This is a new public-private partnership that I want to start. And what it looks like is we, the government, will provide underutilized government facilities like McNeil Island, like a couple locations in Yakima. I want to start with Evergreen State College. We've seen enrollment go down by 42% there. Yet they just spent... What?
Close down Evergreen. It's unprofitable.
Well, no, we're going to make it a Pathways to Recovery. So what it's going to be is the government is going to provide that location. We just spent $40 million on revamping student housing there. But it's just a failed social experiment. You don't even get grades there. So what I want to do is have nonprofits come in and finally provide people-on-people treatment. When government is doing treatment with detox and recovery, only a 20% success rate. Yet these nonprofits like UGM have an 80% success rate. So let's put people through detox, through recovery, through job training and apprenticeship programs so we can turn their lives around. We spend $1 billion a year in the homeless industrial complex, yet the problem only continues to get worse. So under the Freedom Administration, we're going to have the resolve. It's called compassionate enforcement, and we're going to turn our state around. Because what we're seeing today is not working for us, it's not working for our own personal security, and it's time that we have true compassion. I call it loving your neighbor. I think we're all called to love our neighbor. We're not called to just look on somebody unequally, but we're called to reach our hand down and reach them up, make sure that they get their life on a pattern or a path back onto self-sustainability. I don't use that word very much. But, we are making sure that we're fighting hard for you on my campaign, by the way, and we're always looking for more help. We have some envelopes over here that you can sign up on. You can volunteer for the campaign by making phone calls. You can send text out. You can grab a sign and put it up in front of your house. We'd love to have your help. You know, we cannot do this alone, but I think together there's nothing that we cannot accomplish. So with your help, we can move our campaign forward. I feel good about what the future has, but it's amazing. Just 2 months from now, we see the ballots are going to drop. And it's kind of unbelievable to think that we're already at this point in the campaign where the primary is upon us. So in order to get the news out there, we also have to raise funds, and that's just the Fuel the Fire Pity campaign. So if you're willing to contribute today, I'd love to have your help. You have t-shirts for anybody who contributes, and you can wear a Proud Freedom t-shirt. But I'd love to have you on Team Green. Obviously, my wonderful wife Lindy is here. We've been married for 23 years. You can see her waving at the back. And we have Simon over here, Caleb, Emily, Jeannie. We just are a family that's dedicated to service. Actually, several of you here have been with us in the Philippines, serving for the last 21 years. It's pretty awesome. We've been going to Kenya as well, drilling wells there for the Maasai or building health centers. But God has called us forward to serve today. And so my family is willing and excited to jump in, and thank you so much for many of you who helped support me along the way. Sanctuary policies, I think, are evil. We've been made a sanctuary state here in Washington. Well, I would not allow the sanctuary state to be in place, and I'll let you know why. Because when you become a sanctuary state, we become a hotbed for the sex trade in Washington state. So the definition is 18-year-old and younger in the sex trade. So we actually have, on average age, 12-year-old boys and girls in the sex trade. That means we have 5 and 6 and 7-year-old kids. That's something that you would think you'd see in Thailand or some third world country. So the most vulnerable among us are becoming victimized. It goes into what happened here at 2:08 in the morning when comprehensive sex education was passed. Even TVW put a disclaimer on the screen: content of explicit material is being discussed. So for adults at 2 in the morning, they have to have a warning. What about our 5, 6, 7-year-old kids? And it's all part of the agenda that moves from that, compromise these young, innocent minds, let Planned Parenthood be in the middle schools as the health provider, and then let 13-year-old girls get abortions without parents knowing it. It's why these various steps that Satan is walking up and down at during the session, because the devil is bold, right? But it's time for us to stand up right now in the gap for our kids, for our families, to protect their innocence. Say it again, sir.
We take legal action like the government against sanctuary cities like Seattle and other communities that are self-proclaimed sanctuary cities?
Yeah, so we need an attorney general who actually stands up for the people rather than continue to serve us. I'm happy to say I brought a legal suit against Jay Inslee and Bob Ferguson in federal court 3 weeks ago, and we went to and had our hearing. We had our hearing 2 weeks ago now, and we were in federal court on the phone. The judge, who was appointed by Bush, turns to the Attorney General and says, did your client, the leading law enforcer of the land, Jay Inslee, have the right to shut down our spiritual gatherings? And he said no. So after 156 pages, after 4 different court documents, and 2 weeks of argument from the Attorney General and Inslee that they can enforce their arbitrary decisions against spiritual gatherings, he finally had to admit under oath, with the Constitution as the basis, that he does not have those rights. So we need to start using the courts to actually truly defend the people rather than politicize the courts. I would love to see these 9 justices actually be elected across the state and regions rather than just have them represented from 1 or 2 or 3 counties here on the west side. We need full representation across all of Washington state. Amen. Because I can tell you that central and eastern Washington, as I consistently hear it, they do not feel represented. They feel that Jay Inslee just needs to go north and south on 50 miles on the I-5 corridor, and that they don't feel represented. It's time that we have a governor who truly looks in the eyes of those people that he says he wants to represent and is willing to step in the gap during a difficult time like this. We need a governor who spends more time in Yakima than he does in Iowa running for president.
Yeah. Use our tax dollars to get it.
Any other questions? You've asked a couple. Anyone else?
What do you do about people like Shelma Sawant who want to drive Boeing and Microsoft and Amazon out of Seattle?
Well, Shauna Swant's independently elected there in Capitol Hill. I mean, socialism is on the rise in Capitol Hill and Seattle, but I can tell you the rest of the state is pushing against it. Dear friends of mine who voted Democrat their whole life don't even recognize their party anymore. They're not socialist, so we're inviting them in. We are a big tent party here in the Republican Party. It's a Reagan principle, right? If you agree with us 80% of the time, you're part of us. And thankfully, a lot of people are recognizing that fiscal conservative policies matter. They have a difference because retaining more of our hard-earned dollars is what you need in time of crisis. Government has clearly grown far too large. We need to reduce the size of the government to make sure we give power back to the people. We have a constitution that gives us that right, and or maintains that right, God ultimately gives us that right. But God is good, for sure. Yes, sir.